Two reactions, same news. Grant got two reactions when he told his friend group he was leaving his marketing job to spend 2 years in a full-time physician assistant program. His friend Dorian said, "Wait, actually? That's incredible. Tell me everything." And pulled out his phone right there at the table to text him the name of someone he knew halfway through the same program. His friend Marcus said, "Are you sure that's smart right now? Starting over at 30? And left it hanging there, not unkindly, just heavily. Same news, same night. Two completely different sentences from two people who both genuinely liked Grant, sitting across the same table, eating off the same shared plate of appetizers. Dorian had gone back to school himself a few years earlier for nursing, after a decade doing something unrelated. So when Grant told him the news, there was no performance of concern in his reaction, just real recognition. The kind that comes from having lived through the same fear already. Marcus had watched his own older brother spend 3 years and a mountain of loans on a graduate program he eventually walked away from without finishing. A story Marcus rarely brought up directly, but that clearly shaped how he heard every update Grant gave him afterward. Marcus wasn't projecting cruelty onto Grant. He was projecting onto his brother. What the first year sounded like. Whenever Grant mentioned a rough exam week, Dorian's response was some version of, "That's just anatomy in the fall. Everyone hits a wall there." Delivered like a stated fact, not a comfort offered out of politeness. When Grant mentioned the same rough week to Marcus, he asked, gently but repeatedly, whether Grant had thought about, "What happens if this doesn't pan out?" A phrase that sounds supportive and somehow, in practice, never quite lands that way. When Grant passed his first big pharmacology exam, Dorian asked what came next in the sequence, already 3 steps ahead. Marcus asked what his score actually was before saying congratulations, and then, hearing it was solid but not exceptional, said, "Okay, that's fine though, right?" in a tone that turned a decent grade into something that needed defending. There was a specific evening, around month 5, when Grant showed Dorian his actual transcript for the first time, nervous about how thin his margins still looked against the program's minimum GPA requirement. Dorian looked at it for maybe 90 seconds and said, "This is basically where I was at month 5 too," and pulled up his own old transcript on his phone to compare, side by side, right there at the bar. It wasn't reassurance dressed up as data. It was actual data, and it happened to be reassuring. The two friendships ran on nearly identical facts and produced almost opposite feelings. Same exam scores, same clinical schedule, same loan balance. The only variable was which friend Grant had talked to most recently before he opened his grade portal. Why this isn't just in Grant's head? There's real research behind why this isn't just Grant being sensitive. Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler spent years studying how behaviors and emotional states move through social networks, using data from the long-running Framingham Heart Study. Their most cited finding involves obesity. If a close friend became obese, a person's own risk of obesity rose by around 45%. Separately, they found something similar with happiness. That each additional happy friend in someone's network raised the odds of that person also being happy by about 9%. The mechanism isn't about willpower or peer pressure in the simple sense. It's closer to contagion. Moods, risk tolerance, and even beliefs about what's normal or safe spread through the people closest to you, often below the level where you'd notice it happening. Dorian's baseline belief was that starting over in your late 20s is a normal, survivable thing people do. Being near that belief for a few hours a week made it easier for Grant to hold the same belief about himself. Marcus's baseline belief was that a plan can quietly collapse partway through and take years with it. Which, to be fair to Marcus, is also just true. Being near that belief made every average grade feel heavier than the number on the transcript actually warranted. The rotation that nearly derailed him. Month 14. Grant was pulled into a remediation review after a difficult clinical rotation evaluation. The kind of formal meeting that can, in a worst case, add a semester or end a student's place in the program outright. It didn't end anything, but for about a week nobody could tell him that for certain, and it was a real, serious scare, the kind that would rattle anyone regardless of who they had around them. Dorian's reaction. Okay, that's scary, but a remediation review isn't a dismissal. What does the appeal actually require? And do you want me to look at the timeline with you? Practical, immediate, oriented toward the next step. No time spent dwelling on how bad it felt. Marcus's reaction was simple. I mean, this is kind of what I was afraid would happen. He wasn't trying to criticize Grant. He genuinely wanted to help. But the words still landed differently. Instead of feeling like support, they felt like a quiet reminder that things were going exactly the way Marcus had feared. Grant didn't sleep well for a few nights after that meeting, which is a fairly normal reaction to nearly losing 2 years of tuition and work overnight. What he noticed, almost against his will, was that the version of the week spent mostly around Dorian felt survivable, procedural, and temporary. The version of the same week spent mostly texting with Marcus felt like the beginning of the end. Nothing about the actual review had changed between those two versions of the week. Only the company had. Marcus wasn't the villain. Marcus was not a bad friend, and it's too easy an answer to reach for if it sounds like he was. Marcus genuinely cared about Grant. Over those 2 years, he showed up for him in countless ways, even driving him to the airport twice without being asked. His concern came from a real place. He had watched his own brother take a similar risk, see it fail, and struggle to recover from the debt that followed. But caring about someone, and being the kind of person who can steady them during a difficult season, are not always the same thing. Grant eventually had to accept that these were two different qualities in a friendship. Someone could genuinely care about him, while still not being able to provide the reassurance and support he needed during uncertain moments. What Grant actually did, once he noticed the pattern, wasn't cut Marcus off. He just quietly stopped bringing his grades and evaluations to Marcus first. Big news went to Dorian initially, and only reached Marcus second-hand, weeks later, once it had already settled into a plain fact rather than an open, anxious question still forming in Grant's own head. It's a small adjustment. It changed which emotional frame got to shape the news before Grant had fully formed his opinion of it, and that turned out to matter more than almost anything else he changed that year. Where they all landed. Grant matched into a clinical placement he actually wanted at the end of the second year, and both Dorian and Marcus came to the small dinner his parents threw to mark it. Marcus raised a glass and said he was proud of him, and meant it, visibly, and Grant believed him without reservation. Later that same night, a little looser after a few drinks, Marcus admitted, almost sideways, that watching Grant actually pull it off had made him think about his brother differently too. That maybe the unfinished degree hadn't been inevitable, so much as unlucky timing, and a program that never quite fit him. The contagion research doesn't say the version of Grant near Marcus was doomed, and it isn't really about picking better friends and discarding worse ones. It suggests that this version of Grant had a more difficult emotional journey, not because of his actual grades, but because his confidence was often shaped by the reactions and moods of the people around him. What to do with your own Marcus? If you're in the middle of a hard, uncertain stretch right now, and you've got a Marcus in your life, the honest, unglamorous takeaway is this. You probably don't need to lose that friendship, and you shouldn't feel obligated to stage some dramatic confrontation about it. You might just need to notice which version of the week you're standing in when you check your results, and make sure you're not letting someone else's fear write the caption underneath them before you've had a real chance to read them yourself. This isn't permission to only surround yourself with people who agree with you or to treat every doubter as a threat to be managed either. Some of the most useful things said to Grant over those 2 years actually came from Marcus, buried inside the anxious framing. Real questions about the appeal process and about what the program's fine print actually said, which Dorian, in his optimism, never thought to ask. Grant eventually got better at taking Marcus's concern and stripping the anxious tone off it, keeping the actual question underneath. What does the appeal actually require? Is, stripped of the tone it usually arrives in, a genuinely excellent question. It just needed to be asked by Grant himself, on his own schedule, rather than absorbed second-hand at the exact moment he was most vulnerable to it. Not choosing better friends. Learning to separate the information a person is giving you from the mood they're handing it to you in, and deciding, deliberately, which one you're going to let shape your week.